Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me on this Wednesday evening. Got a lot we're going to get into on this episode of the podcast. Going to talk about what we've learned about the Georgia Bulldogs through 6 practices in fall camp. Talk about who has stood out, some of the stuff we're anticipating as Georgia gets ready for its first scrimmage of fall camp on Saturday. Big day on Wednesday. We had a chance to talk to several assistant coaches as well as Kirby Smart a little bit later on. We'll get into what stood out to us, what we learned there. Talk about Georgia's newest commit, Anthony Lonon from Clark Central, defensive lineman. What stood out in his recruitment, what Georgia's getting there. And we'll also talk a little Georgia basketball toward the end. So be sure and stick around and watch this episode. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to Dogs 24/7. And got to plug our fall camp special, 50% off. Get ready for a big season. We hope that you guys will join us on the Junkyard and have fun on another exciting football season for the Bulldogs. So let's get this episode going. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me on this Wednesday evening as we're recording this. A little bit removed from a pretty busy day over in Athens. Had a chance to talk to several assistant coaches for the Bulldogs and Kirby Smart a little bit later on in the day. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about fall camp standouts. Georgia now 6 practices in to fall camp. What we've heard, what we've learned behind the scenes as this team gets ready for the start of the 2025 season. Talk a little bit recruiting. Anthony Lonon Jr., the latest commitment for the Bulldogs, just right down the road at Clark Central. How that recruitment played out and what the Bulldogs are getting in the UGA legacy. Then we'll finish the episode with a little bit of Georgia basketball talk. But Ben, we are rolling right along, getting ready for the second week of fall camp to get going. Just what's been your general thoughts about what we've heard and what we've learned to this point in camp?
Well, I think at this point in camp, you're probably more often than not hearing flashes of certain people having good days. And I think I always encourage people to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt this time of year because everyone has moments that are good and bad throughout this 15 practice window. And I think that just because you had a good, and we heard, today, I think Glenn Schumann and Todd Hartley both alluded to this when they were talking about certain things. Like, yeah, you might have had a good day 1, day 2, day 3, day 6, but that doesn't mean you're going to have a good day 14, 15. I think we're reaching the time in camp where everything that we're going to learn really from this upcoming Saturday on probably bears more weight than anything that we've seen up to this upcoming Saturday. Now, there are people that I have heard positive things about consistently throughout fall camp. I mean, Colby Young, Noah Thomas, Zachariah Branch, like all of those transfer receivers over the last, cycle, 2 cycles, they are clearly getting comfortable at Georgia with the offense. I mean, Noah Thomas, I think, I guess it was Mike Bobo maybe was talking about it earlier today. And Noah Thomas was maybe asking himself, what's going on? Why am I not as comfortable in the spring? Why am I not playing as fast? Why am I not reacting to things as fast? And, Mike Bobo, and I'm sure James Coley shared this with him, like sometimes it just takes time. You got to get comfortable, just see it through, get as comfortable as you possibly can. And I think that he's seeing some of those in the early stages of fall camp. Bo Walker is a name that's come up a bunch. Roderick Robinson's a name that's come up a bunch. How much of that is a byproduct of them getting some extra reps because Josh McCray hasn't been full go during practices up to this point. So I think that you're typically at this point in camp probably going to hear more, one-off mentions of offensive players who made some plays consistently through the course of those 6 days. And, the names that I just mentioned there are some of the ones that I have heard more regularly, at least on the offensive side over the last week or so.
You hit on something with where we are in fall camp. I want to mention this quote Kirby had today. Quote, I told them the pom poms are out 1 through 6, as far as practice 1 through 6. And then after 1 through 6, all the fun's off. You got to get ready to go. That's where teams separate themselves from this point moving forward. Very easy first day in pads, but practice 7 through 14, they'll do a lot more to define a camp than 1 through 6 will. I mean, I think that kind of sums up what you were just saying there, Ben. Guys that have stood out just from what I've heard, you hit on the majority of them. I mean, Bo Walker's a name that continues to come up, and I think that if you're a Georgia fan, should be super excited because I thought he was one of the real standouts of spring practice, but he's backed it up with how he's practiced so far. You hit on several other guys that I would have mentioned. Was told Raylan Wilson was really good to start this week, and he's a guy. At some point in the summer we did our Sunday roundtable, and I kind of pointed to Raylan Wilson as a guy that I think people are kind of sleeping on. And I felt like he got to a point. This got brought up on the Junkyard earlier this week, where it seemed like toward the end of last season, I thought he was reacting a lot quicker. You could tell he was sort of reading and reacting more at what we expect from a Georgia linebacker. So to hear he's doing well is really impressive. A guy that I wrote about, I think on Saturday, mentioned this on the board, Christian Miller. And I look at that defensive line, and my question right now is, can the guys around him step up and play to that level? I think Christian's done a good job through 6 practices, so we need to see if he can continue that. But that's another guy that's really stood out. And then I'll shout out one more guy. And again, 6 practices in, still got a ways to go, but hearing good things about DeMello Jones. And I know that, Ben, that's a guy you've loved going back to his high school days, and he's trying to make things interesting. I'm still at the point where it's going to be Dalen Everett for sure. Feel pretty confident it's going to be Daniel Harris just from what I've heard and just his athleticism at his size and Daniel Harris. But I think DeMello Jones is trying to get in the mix some way, somehow. And, if you're a player, it's a good problem to have to show out and make the coaches say, okay, we got to get this guy on the field one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Georgia's got that issue at a couple of positions. Like, I think Georgia has that issue at corner. And it's not an issue, right? Like, there's plenty of places around the country that would love to be able to have the depth that Georgia has at cornerback or the depth that Georgia has at linebacker. But, like, you think about what Georgia does, how they typically rotate corners. Like, they're typically playing 2 corners. Last year was a rare example of Georgia, kind of having an ongoing position battle throughout the year between Daniel Harris and Julian Humphrey. And so like that was rare. Typically it's like, these are the 2 guys that are playing corner and they're out there for every single snap. How do you get DeMello Jones and Ellis Robinson enough that they're going to want to be here next year as well? Like, you got to think about that a little bit at linebacker with Chris Cole and Justin Williams. And I know that they've gotten questions about that a lot. It's a little bit easier to rotate and get involved. And, one thing I will say, and this will probably speak to something that we might talk about a little bit later in the show as well. Like, we talked to Kirk Benedict, the special teams coordinator today. And like, I do think Georgia genuinely feels that if it has guys getting involved and competing and participating in meaningful special teams units as a freshman and sophomore, yeah, they might have a little bit watered down offensive or defensive snap count. And also, I thought Todd Hartley had some really insightful perspective-based things when he was talking about young guys and how they should approach process versus the outcome of snaps or yards or tackles or whatever it might end up being that you would be judging yourself on as a result-based thing. It's going to be interesting. How do you get all those linebackers involved? How do you get all those corners involved? You can probably say the same thing at wide receiver, tight end. Like, there's a few positions where it's like, all right, there's more names than snaps to go around at this point in fall.
I wrote about this early on Wednesday, looking at linebacker. At the end of the day, it's a good problem to have. And it's sort of like, I think when Kirby was talking about some rule change that they wanted that, was it Mark Stoops told him that there's no crying from, how was it he said it? I mean, basically,
I don't remember.
It was, Georgia doesn't get to cry about the state of its roster because most other teams would kill.
Yeah, exactly.
To have that kind of situation. But
I think Kirby's even realized that. Like, he went on, I don't want to say soapbox, it's probably an unfair way of characterizing it, but in the spring, he was talking about the youth of the team and how many first year, second year guys that they have on the roster. He's brought it back up as we've gotten into the summer and the fall. but I think he's done it more acknowledging that it's a problem that everyone across college football has faced. And I think that sometimes Kirby Smart probably, I don't think he needs the reality check. I think he has high expectations for his roster. There's a reason that it's where it's at, but I think that sometimes he probably recognizes, oh, wait, I don't feel good about this. I'm complaining about the depth here, the watering down of football. He had a phrasing last year, and I always forget it, but I loved it when he said it. It was like it's not the diminishment of football. You know what I'm talking about. It's like what did he call it? It's like basically he was saying that football is becoming worse
right.
Year over year. And like, I think that's just one of those things where it's like, he feels that his roster is getting worse, and maybe it's because it is, but in comparison to its counterparts, like, you're grading this whole thing on a curve. Georgia's still in the right place on the curve.
There's no crying from the yacht was the line.
No crying from the yacht.
So we at least we cleaned up at least one of our quotes. We decided to just haphazardly jump into live.
We're throwing out quotes that we don't remember exactly what they are.
Well, let's get into some quotes we do remember, because they happened maybe 4 or 5 hours ago. We had a chance to talk to several assistants: Mike Bobo, Todd Hartley, Glenn Schumann, T-Rob, Kirk Benedict. Had a chance to catch up with them, ask a lot of different questions, and wanted to share some of the things that stood out, some of the quotes that caught most people in attendance attention. Definitely caught some folks on the Junkyard's attention, also on Twitter. We're going to start with Mike Bobo. And right off the bat, Mike was asked about Georgia's slow starts on offense last year, some of the issues there, trying to clean that up. And this is what Mike had to say.
There's no doubt. Anytime you start a football game, you want to start fast. We always talk about start fast at the beginning of each half, and the last end and a half as well. You go through it, and a lot of times a lot of it was execution issues, and then sometimes to be quite frank, it was a little bit being conservative in those situations. And then the other side of it, the teams we played were pretty good on defense, and stopped us early in games. But that's been a big point of emphasis of ours. There's several of them, but starting fast is one of them. And you'd like to start fast every day. Sometimes every game, but sometimes starting fast, does not necessarily mean your touchdown, or touchdown, field goal, touchdown. Sometimes starting fast is you get a couple first downs and you change the field position. When you go 3 and out to start games, that's something we definitely improve on.
Now, Mike got a little bit of heat I saw from folks about the just not getting 3 and outs and flipping the field. I think he's absolutely right. But I think coming off the season that Georgia had, I mean, Mike Bobo's been the easiest punching bag at Georgia for pretty much my entire life, it feels like. But I did want to read Georgia last year, first quarter, a total of 61 points scored, 6 first quarters where they did not score at all. I mean, Ben, this is a legitimate question going into this season. It was something where it seemed like week after week last year, Georgia was playing from behind. And, even though this schedule I don't think is nearly as daunting as last year's, I mean, Georgia has to start quick and cannot be digging themselves out of the hole, because it felt like so many games last year, you were flirting with disaster, and just more often than not, Georgia got the breaks it needed to dig out of those holes.
Well, I knew the second that he said that people were going to run with that specific little part of it and be upset about it. And I get it. It's not that he was saying he doesn't want touchdowns and field goals at the starts of games. It was that sometimes you have to be realistic about it. If you're playing a top 5 defense, you might not get a touchdown on the first possession. You might not get a field goal on the first possession. That shouldn't end the entire, it shouldn't just be, didn't get those. Nothing else matters. Like, you still want to, what he was acknowledging was they need to eliminate the 3 and outs. And they had a little bit of a first drive 3 and out problem at times last year. That's a big thing that you have to eliminate. So I understood and agreed completely with what he had to say. I'll also say I thought the 2 topics that have gotten people most up in arms this offseason or throughout last year were the slow starts and Georgia's ability to run the football. And I think that Mike Bobo conceded those were the 2 areas of emphasis that Georgia had to improve upon year over year for you to consider the 2025 season a success. And so I get that the folks that are anti-Bobo or don't believe in Bobo, that they're going to feel that way, save for one thing, and that is Georgia winning a national championship. We've already seen that Georgia winning an SEC championship is not going to be enough for people to feel like they've been disproved on their beliefs around Mike Bobo. So the only thing that is going to change any opinion on Mike Bobo is him laying a dud this year and the people that maybe are on his side finally coming around and saying that's the end. Or people that do not support Mike Bobo. If Georgia wins a national championship or Georgia has a historically good offense, I think that they might quiet down a bit. But at this point in time, it doesn't matter what he says. If you disagree with him or don't like him or don't want him to be the offensive coordinator, you're just going to lean into all the things that he says that you disagree with or that you feel like you can, like you said, Jordan, turn into being a punching bag. And so, that's sort of the thing about Mike Bobo stuff at this point in time. Like, it's good for business. People get worked up about Mike Bobo, but it's like he's just in an unfair spot where it's like the only thing he can do is go out there and be an offensive coordinator and hopefully score a lot of points this year. And if he does, it's a weird spot. It's like if he does that, he's going to be Georgia's offensive coordinator moving forward. If he doesn't do that, he's probably not. And it's really as simple as that this season.
I'm already tempted to just go ahead and start the game thread for Marshall just so we can see what folks got to say because they're ready. I can already feel it.
I mean, it is interesting because the first drive against Marshall has no impact on what kind of football team Georgia has. The conversation around that first drive against Marshall is going to dictate the tone of the entire season. If Gunnar Stockton play action, slot fades to Zachariah Branch for 75 yards on the first play from scrimmage and Georgia scores a touchdown and then Georgia scores 50 in that game, everyone's going to think that the Georgia offense is something that it probably isn't. If Georgia goes 3-and-out on that first drive against Marshall, I might have to log off for the day on that one, Jordan.
We're going to hit our click count by the end of the quarter if things do not go well. You mentioned the run game. I did have another clip of Mike talking on Wednesday, and he was asked about the identity of this offense. And he starts this answer talking about how valuable fall camp is in terms of defining identity, and you've got guys going out and working. And I'm picking up mid-answer because he turns the attention to the run game, and it's something that's so important. And when you talk about what Georgia wants to revitalize this year, I mean, Kirby Smart has come out and said running the ball and stopping the run is just two of the key pillars of this team, especially during fall camp. So here's what Mike had to say on the run game, why it's so important to get things cleaned up there.
But I think your identity, everything starts with the run game. At any level, you've got to be able to run the ball and stop the run. And that's been an emphasis of ours since we got back from the Sugar Bowl and started meeting as a staff and meeting with our players. How can we improve in that area? And I'm not just talking about numbers. I'm talking about being efficient. And a run game is not going to just help you offensively. It's going to help your quarterback. It's going to help your defense. It's going to help all areas. And, hopefully our identity we will be efficient in the run game and everything will run through that.
I think we were all really disappointed with how that run game bore itself out last season. The Trevor Etienne, him missing early in the year and then getting hurt and just struggling to run the ball. And, that I thought was a big issue to end the season, that Sugar Bowl, just not being able to run the ball, not being able to block. And, I think that they go into this season knowing that, we have to watch this offensive line in action, but I think they're in a good spot as far as the run game with what they have in the backfield. I mean, they've got probably 7 backs that you could conceivably see getting playing time. So, Ben, they go into this fall camp understanding how big of an emphasis needs to be put on the run game. And, call me crazy. I've got the confidence they can improve it. Now, will it be one of the best in the SEC? I don't know, but I don't think we're going to see a repeat of 2024.
I agree. I mean, I'll say it this way. If we were having this conversation in 2021 or 2022, or, those were great years. So everyone's going to think about the great from that. Like, let's say 2019 or 2020, or hell, even 2023 at times. If I were to sit here and say to you, Georgia was going to finish 14th out of 16th in the SEC in rushing next year, every Georgia fan in the world would have jumped down my back saying, what are you talking about? Georgia, like being that poor of a rushing offense. That's where I lean towards. I think it was an outlier. I think it was an anomaly. I don't think that you can, as an opponent, like if I'm an opponent preparing for Georgia, if I'm relying on Georgia not running the football well this year, I don't think that that's a successful blueprint. I think the same could be said for Georgia stopping the run. I mean, look, Georgia was not great stopping the run last year on defense. And it's funny, Mike Bobo brought up the got to run the ball, got to stop the run. Glenn Schumann brought up the got to run the ball, got to stop the run. Kirby Smart, in the brief time that we got hit with him today, he was talking about the goal being 5 yards per carry, and that it might be lofty. It might sound crazy when you're in the SEC with the defenses that you're going up against. It's not going to be easy to be able to do that, but that is the goal. That is the expectation and what they're shooting for. And so, again, to me, you can be frustrated with what last season was. The purpose of the coaches that you hire and pay a lot of money to is understanding, diagnosing, and acknowledging the problems that you have. And I think that Georgia has done that. Whether or not that is going to reflect itself in running the ball better, we don't know. Like, we can hear good things on Bo Walker and Nate Frazier and Roger Robinson. We can hear that the offensive line's healthy and they maybe are, better at moving the line of scrimmage in the run game than it was a year ago. That's great. You got to actually see Georgia run the ball to really feel great about it. But again, if we're like in a vacuum at any period of time in the history of Georgia football, and you're saying, do I feel better about Georgia running the ball or some other team running the ball? You're always going to say Georgia. Has that shifted over the last 2 years or so? Maybe a tad. Is that going to continue? I don't necessarily think so. And I think that the acknowledgement and the emphasis of running the ball as being the issue from last season, which again doesn't take a rocket scientist, it doesn't take $1 million contract to know that Georgia didn't run the ball last year, and that's something that's got to improve for the offensive staff to stay in place after this year. But I think that it's still, you want to hear the acceptance of where the problems were, and Mike Bobo did not shy away from where they were not good last year. And the same can be said for Glenn Schumann, which I don't think gets talked about enough, but you can tell it eats up Glenn Schumann what that defense did stopping the run last year.
Yeah. He said as a defense on the whole, they did not meet the standard. And he said, we just were not consistent enough as a defense to meet the standard that's at Georgia. I wanted to read this quote going back to the run game. I thought this was interesting from Mike Bobo. He was talking about Nate Frazier, and he talked about the big thing with Nate is trying to get him to not want to try to hit that home run every single time. Take what the defense gives you. This is part of the quote. That's something we've got to get better with all the backs, is that we've got to learn to get the dirty yards. And every play is not going to be a home run. A lot of these backs in high school, they're the best player on the field, and they can bounce anything and turn an average play into an explosive play by bouncing it out running. This league's different, and working on his steps, working on his vision, and keying the right defender up front and pressing the hole and hitting. That's something I think in the first 6 practices you've seen an improvement of Nate being willing to stick it in there and get the dirty yards. I mean, I'd never really thought about that, but I think what Mike is saying makes sense. I think when you are a young back especially, you get the ball and you want to try to break off a 50-yard run. But, if he can get these guys kind of play within themselves, take advantage of the blocking ahead, 6-7 yard runs may not be the sexiest thing for a running back, but I mean, that's what keeps drives alive. At one point, Kirby today was asked about the offense being more efficient, and he talked about trying to keep Gunnar Stockton out of 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 10s. If you just take what's in front of you, if the offensive line opens up holes, those 4, 5, 6 yard runs, you mix in enough explosive ones, and this run game is back on track like they want it to be.
Completely agreed.
All right, going to switch over to Glenn Schumann. Actually, no, one more from Mike Bobo, and he was talking about Gunnar Stockton. I thought this was interesting. He was talking about Gunnar and understanding he has that rushing ability and that he can move a little bit. I felt like we didn't see a ton of that in the Notre Dame game, but this coaching staff seems like they really like what he's able to do there. But the challenge of trying to allow him to do that, but also trying to keep him healthy, trying to keep him upright, sort of how you go about that balance. And this is what Mike had to say.
Yeah, it's one thing to say not to do that, and it's another. And on the flip side, it's hard to practice that because our quarterbacks aren't live in practice situations and plays. There's loose plays all the time for the quarterback, and he's a guy that can extend plays and make plays by extending them and throwing the ball downfield and running with the football. So whether we're in a walkthrough or practice, even though he's not getting hit, we're constantly talking about what would you do in this situation. I'm going to get the yards. I'm sliding here. It's third down. I'm going to get the first down, because his makeup and his mentality sometimes is I'm going to go get everything. And there's a time and place for that. And it's one thing to say, it's a hard thing to practice because he's not getting hit. So we're constantly talking about those things, looking at the film and situations where he's pulled it down, he's extended it, or maybe he's running. What are you going to do here? And we're talking about it. And, we're going to have to live through some of that because, he's got the mentality of a guy that's going to go get it, but he's not, 230, 235 pounds. So he's got to protect himself when he does decide to pull the ball down and run the ball. And then, at the same time, there are going to be some instances where we've got, quarterback runs designed for him, but there's got to be a balance because any play that's called, he could turn it into a quarterback run. So as a play caller, you got to be mindful of that. It's something we're working through.
Ben, I kind of feel like you on the last episode when we were talking about Kirby's quote where he was like, we have a quarterback that we know he can do some things. I mean, I come out of what Mike had to say right there thinking they feel pretty confident in using Gunner's legs. And I mean, I just felt like after that Notre Dame game, it just didn't seem like that was a part of the game plan. But I mean, call me crazy. I feel like they really see him as somebody that they can have some design runs, as Mike mentioned right there, albeit understanding they got to keep him healthy and try to get him through a whole season.
Well, that's the thing. Like I've been telling folks to be cautious if they're expecting Gunner Stockton to be this true dual threat running quarterback. I say pump the brakes a little bit on that, just because I don't think that we should be expecting, if Georgia has 10 play drives, that there's going to be 2 QB design runs in there every single time they do it. Like, it's just not the way that I see this offense happening. Do I think that he has the legs to take advantage of situations when there's a coverage sack that's going to happen and he's able to pick up some yards, pick up first downs? Yes, I think he's going to be able to do that. I think what Mike Bobo said there that really stood out to me is his ability to extend plays. What would you do in certain situations when there's pass rush? And in practice, you just get rid of it here because you know that you're not going to get touched. But in another situation, maybe you try and move the pocket a little bit, see what you can do. And I think that one of Gunner Stockton's strengths is getting the ball downfield in one-on-one situations. And so I think his ability to extend plays and then still get the ball down the field to Noah Thomas or Colby Young, who I think have the chance to be real weapons down the field in this respect, that's where I think that his legs are going to shine this season. What I'm intrigued about, and, it's funny, no one ever talked about Stetson Bennett really while he was here as like he's this dual threat guy, but like he's the closest thing to a true dual threat quarterback that Georgia probably has ever, I don't want to say it has ever had, but in the last 20 years that Georgia's had. And I mean, this is a guy that took against an Auburn defense 65 yards to the house, just breaks away from an Auburn secondary. Like, it might have, I don't even know the exact yards, but around 65 yards. And I bring up all that to say one thing Georgia did a lot, especially in 22, was quarterback power in the red zone. Like, they would get it to Stetson and they would have 10 blockers and they would just, score a lot in the red zone with quarterback power. That's one area that I'm curious if Gunner Stockton can re-unlock Georgia's ability to do that, more so than do I think that Georgia's going to be running like drives filled with read option where he's running the football. I don't necessarily see that as much.
Yeah, I don't think that Georgia's gonna run the playbook I'm running on College Football 26. We're not running the quarterback every single play. Switching over to the defense, Glenn Schumann, he came out with a pretty interesting opening statement, said that he thought the fire, passion, and energy he's seeing on defense is outstanding. Talked really positively about several players. I asked him about Christian Miller, had some positive stuff about him, Quintavious Johnson, Joseph Jr. But I did want to play this clip, and we hinted at this a few minutes ago. We were talking about the standard, and did the defense last year meet the standard that's at Georgia? And Glenn didn't think that was the case, and this is what he had to say.
No, I think that's we weren't consistent enough to meet the standard. Like that's just the reality. You can't have games against 5 playoff opponents, the teams that made the 12-team playoff, and play really well there, and then have 4 other games where you give up 28 points or more, point blank period, right? Like we know that has to be better, and you can't be up and down. Consistency is the mark of great defense. We talk about being elite or not. Like, to be elite, you have to be consistent. That's what makes something elite. So we can't have up and down performances. And everybody in that room knows that when they came to Georgia to play championship level defense, coaches, players included. And so anything short of that isn't the standard.
Consistency is the mark of a good defense. That feels like something you would see in a field house somewhere in South Georgia. I mean, it's interesting to me. Yeah, I feel like the defense lapsed at times, but I'm thinking about Ben even going back to like the night the Sugar Bowl ended. I feel like the defense did all it could, barring getting a stop late in that game. But the standard's very high at Georgia, and I can't sit here and say I'm surprised that Glenn Schumann feels like the group didn't live up to the standard, because Georgia's had some outstanding defenses, and they want to get back to that in 2025.
Yeah, I think, again, it is all based on your own standards and your own expectations. Georgia lives in many years, as we've talked about this with recruiting related things. We've talked about this with overall offensive productivity. We've talked about this with winning championships. Like, the expectations at Georgia are different than other places. You've earned those. You have played your way into those. But the defense there were moments last season where it was just like, man, this defense can't get a stop. It felt like at points in that Georgia Tech game, Haynes King was going to be able to do whatever he wanted in second, third, fourth, and short situations. And that was something that just cropped up more times than you would expect for a Georgia defense last season. Like, Glenn Schumann said, like, he calls out, you play 5 top 25 opponents and you actually play them really well defensively. And then you've got 4 games where you give up 28 plus points. It's almost like it's kind of like the conversation that I had last year around Carson Beck when I was talking about his interceptions. And it's like his interceptions would come on first down, situations where it just didn't have to happen. Careless, reckless, almost arrogant mistakes. I feel like that was kind of the case with the Georgia defense at times last year, where it's like, oh, this is UMass. Like, this is Mississippi State. It's Georgia Tech. Who cares? Texas, you're fine. Alabama first half was rough defensively. Like the first 3 or 4 drives, Milroe kind of just tore them apart. That was probably more of just like a schematic punch in the mouth that they weren't expecting, more so than the team not defending the run the way that they would have liked to. But other times throughout the year, and look, again, there's a reason Glenn Schumann and Mike Bobo both said it. Got to run the ball, got to stop the run. Sounds cliche. I think that the Georgia 2024 football team is some of the ultimate evidence of you can be talented, you can play well, you can even be better than a lot of really good opponents and find a way to win games and win championship that you probably shouldn't have. But you're probably not going to win a national championship in college football right now if you cannot run the ball and stop the run. And Georgia just wasn't good enough in that respect last year to be able to do it. And I don't have the answer for you right here on August 6th on whether they're going to have it for 2025 or not. But they certainly know that's what has to be corrected to get back to 21 and 22 level of championships.
Yeah, they are definitely putting an emphasis on it. And you hit on the 2 games from last year I was going to bring up, Mississippi State and UMass, where it was just, even Mississippi State, I think like the first half was pretty clean, and Georgia had a decent little lead, and then they started making explosive plays, and Georgia let them hang around. And then UMass, it was never really in contention, but UMass was putting up more plays than any of us expected on that defense. All right, last clip we have loaded up. Had a chance to talk to Kirk Benedict, the special teams coordinator, for the first time. I thought that was a really interesting conversation. He talked about a lot of different facets of special teams, mentality, things like that. But part of the conversation, and we heard it the very first day at practice, Georgia's looking for some new gunners after Dominic Lovett and Arian Smith moved on to the NFL. Who's going to fill those spots? Kirk Benedict talked a little bit about that, threw out some names and sort of what they're looking for from these guys.
Great question. Okay, so we've had a good track record of gunners around here with Aaron and Dom. They were great. You go back and look at the success they had combined with Thorson's punts, and those guys were great. And I think the biggest thing as far as what you look for in a gunner is, one, speed. I think fire, passion, and energy comes into that too. Want to be out there. And then also the ability to get someone on the ground. And you don't always know that with offensive players. You got to put them out there in practice and situations to make sure that they have that third one. But I think those three things, speed, fire, passion, energy, and ability to get someone on the ground is huge. I think Arian and Dom have made it easier, right, for us to look forward to the future of who's going to replace them, because they set such a high standard that now it's not something like pulling teeth to ask someone to go out there and do it. They want to do it. It's become kind of a place of honor on our punt team. So it's kind of up for grabs, and it's a competition, and we've got a lot of good candidates. We've got London Humphreys working over there. We've got KJ Bolden working at gunner. We've got Daniel Harris. We've got Jeremy Bell. We've got Dalen Everett. No one is off the table when it comes to working at that position. So we've had a lot of good candidates. We've got a lot of guys that can run. We've got some guys that can get some guys on the ground. So I think that's a great competition to keep an eye on, and obviously one that those guys want to be a part of.
A little bit later on, Kirk was asked about KJ Bolden and any hesitation putting him out there. You don't want to get him hurt. And he was just like, no hesitation. And I think that matches what we've seen from Georgia. The thing about Malachi Starks as the punt returner last year. And, again, Arian and Dom are really important parts of the offense, and they let them go out there because they were the best at that job. And again, Ben, I think we take for granted that 2023 season, no punt returns. I mean, that's like something out of a video game. So the standard, we talk about the standard being high, but that's the case at gunner. I mean, whoever is stepping into that role, Kirby talked about how great both of those guys were. And you've got big shoes to fill because Georgia has done such a good job of flipping the field because of those guys. And it's an important thing that gets overlooked, but Georgia wants guys who are up for the challenge and ready to get after it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is Kirby Smart and Kirk Benedict's dream right here. We're doing a segment on the show where we're talking about gunners, which I love it. And I think that it is a testament. And Kirk Benedict talked about this a little bit today. Like, it's a testament to what Arian Smith and Dom Lovett did, that they've almost created this culture where people want to be in this role. You're not having to pull teeth and say, hey, we need a guy that's fast that can get people on the ground to serve this role. Like, they've heard Kirby praise it enough. They've heard Kirby call out to NFL scouts when they're out there saying, like, hey, look at these two guys. And I think that people realize, like, this is an opportunity to get NFL eyes on me when I might not otherwise be. So I think that they've created that culture that has, or helped create that culture at least, that has made it so you have guys like KJ Bolden that are even willing, Dalen Everett, Daniel Harris, that are willing to be part of the conversation around that. I also think, and Kirk Benedict brought this up as well, Arian and Dom changed the Georgia coaching staff's perspective on who are candidates for this. You think of defensive-sided players because they're used to tackling, getting people on the ground. Arian Smith and Dom didn't have issues with that, and because of their ability to get off the line of scrimmage, get down the field, probably some route running technique things that helped them in that regard, made it so there weren't a whole lot of punts getting returned in the first place. And so that's why you hear London Humphreys. That was a fascinating name. Makes a lot of sense to me. Jeremy Bell is a name that we've mentioned before as like, this guy is actually more of a potential player at Georgia than you would think. And I think that that's not just on special teams. the KJ Bolden one's interesting. I didn't want to stir the pot. Sometimes I'm in a pot stirring mood, but I didn't want to stir the pot. But I know Kirk Benedict didn't have any issues with KJ Bolden as the gunner. Does Glenn Schumann and Travaris Robinson have issues with KJ Bolden as a gunner? They wouldn't necessarily say it, but they might have a slightly different opinion. Of course, if I'm Kirk Benedict, of course I want KJ Bolden as my gunner. You get one of the best safeties in the country that can absolutely scoot at that position. Why wouldn't you? It is interesting. We've talked a little bit earlier about like Ellis Robinson and DeMello Jones. I mean, DeMello Jones in particular, he's got the straight line speed in a way that would make a lot of sense too. Like, could that be a way that you get him some extra snaps and make him feel involved, even if the cornerback rotation isn't quite where he would want it to be? But yeah, no, I think it's great. I love that we got to talk to Kirk Benedict today, just because a whole 15 minutes dedicated to special teams is, a nice little change of pace. And I think sometimes football fans in general, take for granted the importance of that phase of the game. And I think that at Georgia, when you are a fan of Georgia, you should appreciate that phase of the game, because you do it better than just about anybody in all of college football, but really all of football.
Anything else, Ben, that stood out to you? T-Rob, I liked him telling the story from Charles Kelly, who's now the head coach at Jacksonville State. He said, if you're at a program, you got two kinds of issues. You got potholes and you got sinkholes. And potholes, you can hit them, you can keep on going. Sinkholes got a little bit bigger an issue. And, T-Rob was telling me, this is my second year at Georgia. I have a better understanding of the potholes and what I can avoid and some of the bigger issues that come with being at Georgia. Good perspective on Ja'Cory Thomas. A guy that I think is in a really good spot when it comes to that safety battle. But, T-Rob said, you don't see guys like this anymore. He said that back when he was playing, he played at Auburn. It's like you had no choice but to wait for your opportunity and try to run with it. But Ja'Cory stayed at Georgia. He's put himself in a good position. Fascinating to see what else he does during the season. Todd Hartley, thought he got good perspective on Lawson Lucky, and a play that I think is easy to forget about. Lawson making the tackle on a key interception in the fourth quarter of that game against Texas. And, just Lawson's drive and what Lawson brings there. And then John Lilly talking about him. And he said, it's nice having a guy where if we split up the different positions and he's on the other side with my tight ends and I'm working with some folks, he said, my tight ends may be being coached better by him than they are by me. So I thought that was good perspective there. Anything from those two coaches or anything from the other coaches we did not talk about, you want to throw in on the episode?
Well, anybody who knows T-Rob knows that he likes to joke around a little bit. He likes to, poke fun at players, coaches, doesn't really matter. I think it's so interesting. I don't know why I find it funny whenever he's asked about like life at Georgia. He was like, it's year 2. I think it was when he was getting into the potholes versus sinkholes conversation, and he sort of laughed before he answered the question. And it's like, I know he's mentioned it in the past, like nobody's safe from Kirby Smart on the mic, that he's like, you learn real quick that like Kirby Smart's always watching. Like, I think he said that last fall camp when it's like, what's different about Georgia? And it was just funny because I thought when he was asked about like the year 2 and he started talking about like, I know what problems to avoid, stay out of trouble. It's like, you could tell he's, gotten taken to the woodshed from time to time in year 1, as I'm sure any coach on the staff has. And I think you learn, how to take those punches from Kirby Smart, just as players do, when they're when he's on the mic at practice as well, getting after them too. So I don't know. I found that to be a funny moment. And then Todd Hartley just has a command of the room. Like, I mean, I know, I'll say it this way, enjoy Todd Hartley while you have him, because I don't know how long for the position coach world he is. I mean, he carries himself in a way that I could see him running a program. We don't get a ton of media exposure to these guys, at least in press conference format. And I think, as silly as it might sound, I think sometimes that's the format that separates a guy from being a really good football coach and being a head coach. I think that's like the optics game of being a head coach makes that a skill set that is a little bit different from just, oh, I know ball, I know X's and O's, I know how to teach, I'm a good football coach. And I think that it is very evident in that setting that Todd Hartley has that. And it's why he's so organized. It's why his room always has stacked bodies and is as efficient of a production room as any at Georgia. Todd Harley. That's just the way that he kind of carries himself. And I think that if he were to have a program of his own someday, he would run it that exact same way.
No doubt. I think he'll get a chance to be a head coach one day, and I would not be surprised to see him be successful. We're going to take a quick break. Before we do that, want to plug fall camp special over at Dogs 24/7, 50% off. Come join Ben, me, Kipp, Olivia Sayer, getting ready for another football season with the Georgia Bulldogs. Sign up. We're going to talk some Georgia basketball a little bit later on. Olivia's got you covered for Georgia baseball. A great time to join the Junkyard. I think you will not be disappointed with what you get if you sign up right now. So we'll take a quick break, talk a little bit more fall camp. We're going to talk about a recruiting win for Georgia, and then finish off with UGA hoops. All right, Ben, we are gearing up for the first scrimmage of fall camp for the Bulldogs. That will be on Saturday. Hoping to get some good intel out of that. You guys stay glued to the Junkyard. We will have good stuff from what we've learned behind the scenes. But if there's one thing, Ben, that you can learn from this fall camp, that you find out, that you're looking to find out, what would it be?
Can Georgia's safeties get the job done this season? I mean, it was interesting. Like I understand why the question was asked. I understand why it was answered the way that it was when they were talking about KJ Bolden and playing gunner. He's really the only guy they've got at safety or star that we've seen do it. And he's a true sophomore. It's kind of crazy when you really think of it. Like, Travaris Robinson, I don't think he necessarily intended it this way, but he said this today. Like, I almost feel bad for him at points because, like, I'm looking around and I'm trying to find guys that have been there and done that. And, like, look, he said this too. It's like everywhere else is not Georgia. And I think he means that very intentionally. Like, you maybe played at USC or UAB. That doesn't mean that or Miami. That doesn't mean that you're ready to step in and be better than guys that have been in Georgia's system for 3-4 years. Like, that's just not the case. And so I don't know exactly what the rotation is going to look like with Ja'Cory Thomas or Adrian Maddox or Zion Branch or Jaden Harris, or at star with, Janelle Aguero or Kyron Jones. And honestly, probably wasn't enough asked about Janelle Aguero in the star position today. So hand up on that as well. But there's uncertainty there. And from my understanding, based on what we've seen early on in fall camp, just from talking to people that have been in a lot of these practices, or all these practices in some cases, just not sure. Just not sure yet whether the corners, I don't think anybody's got any issues with the depth or talent at corner. But that back end, is it going to be experienced enough or able enough to be able to get the job done? I don't think we have that answer yet. I don't even know if we'll have that answer until sometime in the middle of week 3 when Georgia's in Knoxville.
Yeah, there's several questions that are going to linger just given the competition to open the season. I think that's a great pick, and I was going to bring up T-Rob being like, KJ's the veteran in the room, and this is his second fall camp. So that just speaks to what they lost.
And I'm not trying to be alarmist by saying that either. Like, look, Georgia recruits talented defensive backs. A lot of these guys would be starting at places that you would consider rivals of Georgia. So it's not to say that this goes back to the previous conversation where it's like, all right, we're talking about what Georgia has had at safety. And I was talking about this earlier this week too. Like, Georgia kind of needs Ja'Cory Thomas to have his Chris Smith year, right? Where it's like you've been waiting to see it and you're not sure. And then all of a sudden it's just like, oh yeah, this is why you wait your turn. And then you do it. Like if Ja'Cory Thomas is that, I'm willing to walk back every single thing that I've said about the safety position.
I'm staying on that side of the ball, and I want to hear something about this defensive line aside from Christian Miller. I feel like when I've heard conversation, gotten good feedback on defensive line, it's mostly been Christian Miller. And I say that knowing that I feel like they've got other guys that are capable. Jordan Hall, Joseph Jonah Jr, Gabe Harris, if they play in there at defensive end, Xavier McLeod. I think we are all really high on him. It can't be a one man show on the defensive line. They got to have someone other than Christian Miller if this is going to be an effective defense. And the thing I go back, and I've said it over and over again on this podcast, Georgia's been at its best, especially when the interior defensive line's been really good. So if you get a big performance from Jordan Hall, that would make me feel good. Now, again, part of the fall camp conversation, if we come out of Saturday and we're like, defensive line looked really good, everybody's going to start panicking about the offensive line. But I do truly want to hear, does someone other than Christian Miller on that line stand out? If so, I think the sky's the limit for this entire defense.
No, I completely agree. I will say Xavier McLeod's another name that I've heard has stacked a couple of good practices together as well, and I think he could be in line to have a key role this season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the fact that this is his second year at Georgia, and it just felt like when he was on the field last year, he really, really flashed. All right, Ben, let's turn our attention to a future Georgia defensive lineman, Anthony Lonon Jr., committing to Georgia on Saturday, the Clark Central standout, picking the Bulldogs over Georgia Tech, 6'2", 265. Ben, what can you tell us about this recruitment and then just what Georgia's getting in Anthony Lonon Jr.?
I had someone in the program say to me, when you've got a guy that productive, that is that A+ of a person, or the character eval that they've done on them is so high, and they want to be in Georgia's program as badly as they do, you've got to take that guy. The fact that he's a legacy and a local prospect, I think, is only a coincidence in all of that. Like, yes, he's at Clark Central. It made it very easy for Georgia to get over to see him. It made it very easy for Georgia to have a much better understanding of who he was as a person and player. Yeah, his dad played in the late 90s with Bobo and Kirby, and so he's very familiar with so many people on the coaching staff and in Athens that, yeah, like there was a familiarity with him and his family that there wouldn't have been for, some other prospect 3.5 hours away. Those aren't the reasons why he ended up at Georgia. Crazy production level his junior season last year. I think he led the region in sacks, led the region in pressures. What's interesting to me is he has that production level, and he'll be the first to tell you this, by the way, Anthony will be. He's an undersized defensive lineman. I mean, he's 6'2", 265, not the typical, the arm length, wingspan measurements, not typically what Georgia is looking for on the defensive line. But I think that he's wired the right way. I think that his film is incredible. And I think that, look, I talked with Anthony about this. He said, look, I know I didn't get an offer from Delaware until my November of my junior year because I'm 6'1.5", right? Like, I know that if I was 6'3.5", it would have been entirely different. I think that I talked with his high school football coach, David Perno, former Georgia baseball coach. He was pretty clear. He's like, look, the transfer portal has changed how high school football recruiting works. And if the transfer portal doesn't exist, that's a guy that already has a dozen offers before the start of his junior season. Like, things have changed. And because people are so NFL measurable driven, a guy like Anthony Lonon can sort of get missed at times, or a school like Georgia, as was the case here, knows about him, almost wants to keep him hidden. They don't want everybody else to know about him because they want it to be easier. And they reached a point where, like, Wake Forest jumped in, NC State jumped in, Georgia Tech jumped in. And I think Georgia realized, like, all right, enough others have taken notice here. Like, we've got to make a move, bring him in on a camp at the beginning of June, see what he can do, meets all of those, checks all of those boxes. Obviously they're familiar with his dad. People are familiar with his dad being a former player. I was not as familiar with his mom, who is like the head of the Clark Central fundraising arm and like the whatever clubs. I don't even know. I should know exactly what it is, but I got to listen to her speak to a group of people. It's like That's why Anthony's the way that he is. He's the student council vice president because like his mom is like a leader among leaders. Like she just commands a room in a way that $1 million coaches that I know don't do. And so it's why he, again, I'm not sitting here trying to have like a, parental, talk about parenting or anything like that or make it too serious. But like, look, Anthony is wired in a way that he checks so many boxes that made Georgia be okay saying, all right, not 6'4", 6'2". All right, not 280, 265. Let's bring you in. And I'll say this too. We've talked a lot about NIL, how the revenue share world changes things. You can't, like when you're having to go out and, overpay the per player average for guys like Jared Curtis or, Nick Abrams perhaps, or, I don't even want to name specific names, but just like when we're like, you're talking about, you're going over the per player average on certain guys. You're also going to have to go under the per player average on certain guys. And you're going to have to make really intentional evaluations at certain spots. And look, Georgia had already built up a pretty good defensive line class. You're afforded the luxury of maybe going and getting a guy that's not turning into this crazy rev share agent negotiated deal on a little bit more of a bargain. And if he ends up outperforming that by year 2, year 3, he'll reap the benefits of that in the future as well. And I think that he recognizes that too. He's someone that I think could play a little bit in the outside linebacker room, perhaps, probably will have a home on the defensive line. Anywhere from 9 tech to 3 tech. I think a lot of it's going to depend on how his body develops. I think that just generally talking more big picture than just around Anthony, I think Georgia is looking, and Glenn Schumann talked about this today, interior defensive linemen that can rush the passer. I think they're looking for athletic bodies that maybe have a current fit on the outside that can bulk up, still have some of that pass rush skill set, agility, hand speed, move them inside on passing downs. And I think that's a vision that they would have for Anthony or other prospects like Anthony in the future, where you can come in and be a weapon on the inside on pass rushing downs, and then also get some versatility work on the outside as well.
Yeah, I was really impressed with his film, and like you kind of outlined there, Ben. I mean, you'll find a home for him once he gets to Georgia. He's got a lot to like, and I think the future is bright for him. Georgia men's basketball minute on Wednesday. We learned the SEC schedule for the Bulldogs. I'll roll through this just real quick. They will start SEC play home against Auburn, then at Florida, at South Carolina, home against Ole Miss, home against Arkansas, at Missouri, at Texas, home against Tennessee, home against Texas A&M, at LSU, home against Florida, at Oklahoma, at Kentucky, home against Texas, at Vanderbilt, home against South Carolina, home against Alabama, at Mississippi State. A couple quick thoughts on that. I think it's very similar to last season, where those first 5 games, you really need to try to steal 1 or 2, because we're talking Auburn, Florida, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Arkansas. Aside from South Carolina, I mean, I see a world where that could be the top 4 teams, probably 4 of the top 5, something like that. Trying to steal those early on will be really important. And it's kind of a different situation, Ben, I feel like, compared to last season, where I thought a lot of Georgia basketball's toughest games were on the road. And I don't want to say we sat here and chalked them up as a loss, but we were like, look, playing on the road in the SEC is hard enough. You're probably not winning at Tennessee. You're probably not winning at Alabama. Focus on those home games that are winnable and try to go there. I think the situation is flipped this year, where home against Auburn, home against Ole Miss, home against Arkansas, home against Tennessee, home against Texas A&M, home against Florida, home against Texas, home against Alabama. I mean, that is a really tough slate. So, more than anything, I just think Georgia's got to find a way to steal some of these. They've got to pull some upsets at home, I think. I think they need a couple or 3 wins where, maybe they upset in Alabama. Maybe they beat Texas A&M in Bucky McMillan's first season. The home-away split, is kind of tough in the fact that you get your toughest games at home, which, on one hand you like, but defending Stegman, I think, will be harder this season compared to last.
Well, and I just think it's going to be tough in a lot of ways, because think it's hard to replace Asa Newell and Silas Demery the way that people would like to think that you would be able to. I mean, to your point, I don't know. It probably doesn't matter. It's a tough world in either way, but I don't know. Would you rather have your harder games on the road or at home? I don't really know the answer to that. There's probably not a perfect answer to that, but like, look, we found out last season it's no easier to go on the road and win at Mississippi State than it is to, go on the road and win at Kentucky or Tennessee or whatever. Like, it's hard for Georgia to go on the road and win SEC games. It's going to be hard. So like, maybe you actually want your harder games to be on the road because you can just chalk them up as the losses and it's acceptable, where it's like, now you've got to go beat teams that are better than you, that you're probably not going to be favored against at home, to be able to offset what will be inevitable road losses. And this isn't like a inevitable road losses for Georgia. It's inevitable road losses for anyone. Like, teams in college basketball lose on the road. It's the way it is.
We're going to wrap up the episode right there. Appreciate Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched or listened to this live. Thanks to everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. Go subscribe to Dogs 24/7. 50% off right now. Fall sale. I promise it will be worth it. And we're having a whole lot of fun, a lot of conversation over on the Junkyard. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to Dogs 24/7 on YouTube. Subscribe to our TikTok. We had a video of Raylan Wilson that did really well the other day, and we'll have some more content there. So stay glued. Again, keep an eye out on Saturday, that first fall camp scrimmage. Hoping to have some good stuff out of that, and we'll make sure and share it over on Dogs 24/7. So we will end the episode right there. For Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.